So today we are going to be talking about voidness, also known as emptiness, also known as sunyata in Pali or shunyata in Sanskrit. There are different ways of understanding voidness, and we're going to start with Majjhima Nikaya 1.2.1, the shorter discourse on voidness. Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One was living at Savatthi in the eastern park in the palace of Megara's mother. Then when it was evening, the Venerable Ananda rose from meditation, went to the Blessed One, and after paying homage to him, he sat down at one side and said to the Blessed One, "Venerable Sir, on one occasion the Blessed One was living in the Sakyan country, where there is a town of the Sakyans named Nagaraka. There, Venerable Sir, I heard and learned this from the Blessed One's own lips. Now, Ananda, I often abide in voidness." Did I hear that correctly, Venerable Sir? Did I learn that correctly? Attend to that correctly? Remember that correctly? Certainly, Ananda. You heard that correctly, learned that correctly, attended to that correctly, remember that correctly. As formerly, Ananda, so now too I often abide in voidness. Ananda, just as this palace of Megara's mother is void of elephants, cattle, horses, and mares, void of gold and silver, void of the assembly of men and women, and there is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the Sangha of bhikkhus. So what is he talking about here?
Absence of everything except the group of monks.
Yes, exactly.
What was the answer?
It's what this is he's talking about is the absence of all of the things he listed except for the group of monks that are there. In other words, there are in the palace, it's empty of gold and silver, empty of the assembly of men and women, it's empty of horses and cattle and so on. But what is remaining is the group of monks, the Sangha. So too, a bhikkhu not attending to the perception of village, not attending to the perception of people, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of forest. That makes sense. There's no villages or people in the forest, generally speaking. So bhikkhu goes into the forest and he is aware of the forest, but no people, no towns, no villages there. His mind enters into that perception of forest and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of village, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of people, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of forest. He understands this field of perception is void or empty of the perception of village. This field of perception is void of the perception of people. There is present only this non-voidness. It's an interesting way of putting it, meaning there's only presently this singleness dependent on the perception of forest. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, or empty of what is not there, but as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. So he's saying, oh, so there's no village here, there's no people here, but there is present this forest, or perception of forest. Thus, Ananda, this is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Again, Ananda, a bhikkhu, not attending to the perception of people, not attending to the perception of forest, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of earth. His mind enters into that perception of earth and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. Just as a bull's hide becomes free from folds when fully stretched with 100 pegs, so too a bhikkhu, not attending to any of the ridges and hollows of this earth, to the rivers and ravines, the tracts of stumps and thorns, the mountains and uneven places, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of earth. His mind enters into that perception of earth and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. He understands, thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of people, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of forest, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of earth. And when they're talking about the perception of earth, he's really talking about the monk who looks at the earth element as earth element. That is to say, solidity. Or another way of understanding it is just earth element. And so there is a practice in which one looks at kasinas. They take the earth energy or element, the fire element, the air element, the water element, or they take colors. And what they do is then they have their mind fixed on that particular point, and then it expands. Now, the interpretation of this kasina means to be singularly focused on that. But actually, the word kasina, the Pali kasina, comes from the Sanskrit kritsna, which means whole or expansive or expanded. So the mind is not actually one-pointed, it's actually expansive. And so it takes something as an object and then stretches it, expands it. So the perception of earth, the perception of red, the perception of blue, the perception of white, or even loving kindness. One radiates loving kindness, expands it. Let's see. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of people. This field of perception is void of the perception of forest. There is present only this non-voidness, namely, the singleness dependent on the perception of earth. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus, Ananda, this too is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. Again, Ananda, a bhikkhu, not attending to the perception of forest, not attending to the perception of earth, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space. So now he's expanded that experience of earth. Or if you're using loving kindness, you're expanding that experience of loving kindness. You're radiating it outward and you're experiencing infinite space. His mind enters into that perception of the base of infinite space and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of forest, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of earth, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of forest. This field of perception is void of the perception of earth. There is presently present only this non-voidness, namely, the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus, Ananda, this too is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. So if you're in infinite space, are you perceiving form any longer? So it is void of form. Infinite space is empty of the perception of form that you experience while you're in the first four jhanas. Again, Ananda, a bhikkhu not attending to the perception of earth, not attending to the perception of the base of infinite space, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite consciousness. His mind enters into that perception of the base of infinite consciousness and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of earth, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely, the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite consciousness. He understands thus, this field of perception is void of the perception of earth. This field of perception is void of the perception of the base of infinite space. There is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of infinite consciousness. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus, Ananda, this too is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. So now you're experiencing infinite consciousness. While you're experiencing infinite consciousness, are you experiencing infinite space? So infinite consciousness is empty of the experience of infinite space. Again, Ananda, a bhikkhu not attending to the perception of the base of infinite space, not attending to the perception of the base of infinite consciousness, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of nothingness. His mind enters into that perception of the base of nothingness and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of infinite space, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of infinite consciousness, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely, the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of nothingness. He understands, this field of perception is void of the perception of the base of infinite space. This field of perception is void of the perception of the base of infinite consciousness. There is present only this non-voidness, namely, the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of nothingness. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus, Ananda, this too is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. So when you experience nothingness, do you experience infinite space? You experience infinite consciousness. Again, Ananda, a bhikkhu not attending to the perception of the base of infinite consciousness, not attending to the perception of the base of nothingness, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Try saying that 5 times. Perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. His mind enters into that perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. He understands thus, Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of infinite consciousness, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of nothingness, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of the base of infinite consciousness. This field of perception is void of the perception of the base of nothingness. There is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus, Ananda, this too is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. So, when you are in neither perception nor non-perception, do you perceive infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness? Do you perceive anything in neither perception or non-perception?
No.
You do and you don't.
You have the quiet mind, right? Your mind becomes collected in the quiet mind. Again, Ananda, a bhikkhu, not attending to the perception of the base of nothingness, not attending to the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception, listen carefully, attends to the singleness dependent on the signless collectedness of mind. His mind enters into that signless collectedness of mind and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of nothingness, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely that connected with the 6 bases that are dependent on this body and conditioned by life. He understands this field of perception is void of the perception of the base of nothingness. This field of perception is void of the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. There is present only this non-voidness, namely that connected with the 6 bases that are dependent on this body and conditioned by life. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there, he understands that which is present thus. This is present. Thus, Ananda, this too is a genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness. So what is this signless collectedness of mind? Signless comes from the Pali word animitta. Nimitta means sign or object. Animitta means that which is without a sign, that which is without an object, that which is objectless. Collectedness of mind means samadhi. There is an awareness. There comes a point in your practice where you will see quiet mind, and even quiet mind becomes too coarse of an object. And you look at that quiet mind and you relax that. And this is also known as the still mind in some cases. But this mind doesn't land on any object anymore. It is just looking, not looking anywhere. Some people experience this as just this like freeze frame, like everything stops and it's just utter stillness, but the mind isn't looking at anything. It's not collected around anything. It's just looking. Some people see sort of like static. Some people see sort of an orangish hue or greenish hue or something like that. And in this state, the way I use an analogy for it is you have the flashlight, let's say, and you point it up into the sky, out into space, and consider there's no planet, no star, no asteroid, nothing there blocking its way. And the light just continues onward. This is your attention. Your attention is just continuing onward, but not looking at anything in particular, because the moment you look at something, there is an object there. The moment you land on something, there's an object there. So you might have stumbled into this at some point. You might have seen this and said, oh, the mind is looking for something. You know, the mind is looking for some object, but no object is, you know, there. Or there might be something going on, something comes up. And when something comes up, the tendency is for the mind to see that and then let it go. But here, the formation of conceit is where it's the disturbance of the mind. So you are just looking, but not looking anywhere. When we talked about the contact with the Dhamana element, we talked about it as void or empty of self. We talked about it as signless, and we talked about it as undirected. So what we were saying is we see the impermanence of all objects. There's no point to having any objects in the subtle state anymore. And so that is signless. We see that there is suffering in taking on an object now. And so that is known as an undirected mind. The mind doesn't direct anywhere, it just looks. You're looking without looking for anything, just looking straight ahead, not zooming into anything, not looking at this or that, just looking. And we talk about it as being void or empty, empty of self. The moment something comes up, if you catch it, now your conceit comes into the picture, and now you want to do something about it. The moment you see it, don't bother about it. Just keep looking, keep looking. And so when the flashlight keeps pointing up into space, imagine before it points up into space, that attention goes through 8 different cellophane papers, all differently colored, each of them being a jhana. And you let go of the first, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, and the 8th is just this clear plastic cellophane paper. And it looks like you're seeing through something. You let go of that as well, because that too is conditioned. But it's still looking. Mind is still looking. Until finally the battery runs out. The fuel for attention runs out, and the flashlight goes off. And you have cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness. So when you recognize this state, don't do anything. Don't do anything at all. Just observe without any inclination. Object comes up, let it be. Keep watching. Keep looking. Vibration comes up, automatically mind releases it, and you just keep looking. Again, Ananda, a bhikkhu not attending to the perception of the base of nothingness, not attending to the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception, attends to the singleness dependent on the signless collectedness of mind. His mind enters into that into that signless collectedness of mind and acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution. Listen carefully. He understands thus, this signless collectedness of mind is conditioned and volitionally produced. But whatever is conditioned and volitionally produced is impermanent, subject to cessation. So even though there's no object, there's this field of awareness, if you will, just this observing going on, that's still volitionally produced. That's still conditioned by your formations, mental formations. When you understand that that too is conditioned, and you just let go, don't do anything. Just see it as impermanent and impersonal and subject to cessation. When he knows and sees thus, his mind is liberated from the taint of sensual desire, from the taint of becoming, from the taint of ignorance. And so one enters cessation, and then when one comes out, one experiences dependent origination, experiences contact with the Nibbana element. And at some point, if you don't hold on, attain arahatship. He understands thus, birth is destroyed, the holy life has been lived, what had to be done has been done. There is no more coming to any state of being. He understands thus, whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the taint of sensual desire, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the taint of being, those are not present here. Whatever disturbances there might be dependent on the taint of ignorance, those are not present here. There is present only this amount of disturbance, namely that connected with the 6 bases that are dependent on this body and conditioned by life. He understands that this field of perception is void or empty of the taint of sensual desire. This field of perception is void or empty of the taint of becoming. This field of perception is void or empty of the taint of ignorance. There is present only this non-voidness, namely that connected with the 6 bases that are dependent on this body and conditioned by life. Thus he regards it as void of what is not there, but as to what remains there, he understands that which is present. Thus, this is present. Thus, Ananda. This is his genuine, undistorted, pure descent into voidness or emptiness, supreme and unsurpassed. This is the mind of an arahat, empty of everything. No craving, no conceit, no taints. Just aware of whatever is arising in the form of experience of the 6 sense bases. No craving, so nothing will be clung to. No conceit, so nothing will be identified with. No ignorance, so mind will always just be aware of what is arising and passing away. Mind is empty, completely clear, clean, pristine. Ananda, whatever recluses and Brahmins in the past entered upon and abided in pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness, all entered upon and abided in the same pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness. Whatever recluses and Brahmins in the future will enter upon and abide in pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness, all will enter upon and abide in this same pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness. Whatever recluses and Brahmins in the present enter upon and abide in pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness, all enter upon and abide in the same pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness. Therefore, Ananda, you should train thus. We will enter upon and abide in pure, supreme, unsurpassed voidness. That is what the Blessed One said. The Venerable Ananda was satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. Now you have one understanding of what it means when we say voidness or emptiness. What is the first jhana empty of? Hindrances. What is the second jhana empty of?
Directed thought and evaluation.
What is the third jhana empty of? Piti. What is the fourth jhana empty of?
Pleasure and pain.
There you go. Now you know. Moving on.
Is this a good time for questions?
A couple of questions and then we'll see.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah. Quick question. Practical question. So you said when we get to the when we get to that space or place where quiet mind is too coarse, the mind would just keep looking. I'm going to take that to mean just keep observing. If something comes up, just keep looking past it, like don't look at it. So are we supposed to like release and relax?
Mind at this point will automatically release, relax. If you engage with it now, you're engaging conceit that wants to let it go.
Conceit because I'm
I see it,
relaxing,
and so
or
I want to let it, yeah.
But I still see it. I would still see it, I suppose, right? Or
Yes,
does it
but conceit is very minimal here.
So just
Keep
observe
looking,
past
keep
it.
observing, that's it. When you get to this state, don't do anything.
Sorry, I couldn't hear. Will you state the emptiness of these 4 jhanas again?
Yeah. The emptiness of the first jhana is hindrances. The emptiness of the second jhana is vitaka and vichara, thinking and examining thought. The emptiness of the third jhana is the piti, the joy. And the emptiness of the fourth jhana is empty of the sukha as well. Pain and pleasure, joy and grief. It's just equanimous. Yeah.
So this is the first time I think I've heard this transmission. Bhante usually just skipped over it. He wasn't sure how to do it without single focused process. So from a twin perspective, what are the advantages and disadvantages of the kasina process versus our Dhammācariya?
Right, so the question is, from a twin perspective, what are the benefits and or disadvantages of doing a kasina practice? Is that right? Yeah. First of all, the way kasina has been traditionally taught is that, for example, you could look at the fire element, you look at a candle flame, and then you're looking at that, and you close your eyes and you focus on that. But the idea is not to focus on it. The idea is to let it expand. So if you see the color blue in your eye, in your field of vision, let it just pervade everything, and then you get to an experience of infinite space.
You take that as the object.
Then you take the expansion as the object. But it's much more tangible, let's say, to use the Brahma Viharas because you're feeling something. Whereas in the field of vision, in your field of awareness, things can change, things can come and go.
I don't think this is timely. I'm going to pull it back.
Are you applying things?
It's very minutia, and this could be a long topic. I think.
Let's hear it.
You want to hear?
Yeah.
Okay. So, using the animitta and using that as a object of meditation and absorbing into it, there's a different experience than using the twin process of releasing the objects, and the experience of the base of infinite space is different because with using a nimitta, that space has a center. It has an I as a center. But in the twin process, there is no I. It's space without a center.
Right.
So, because I've done both.
Yeah.
And it's a very different experience. And
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's still a form of concentration. Kasina practice.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's still an I there. So kasina practice, there's still an I looking at the kasina, and then you're expanding it.
Yes. Even when that object is even when the object is, the casino is dropped, I mean a physical casino
Yeah.
is dropped, and then there's a nimitta, and then that nimitta is then developed into a full-blown sign, a primary sign.
Right, so that becomes the object.
And then that develops the jhanas, and then at a certain point there's the jhana of infinite space. But that jhana seemed to have an I in it, that I am there.
So there was a lot of identification with that experience.
Yeah, and even though I could stay in that a long time, I was there. And so, and it was wonderful. But the twin jhana, it's just space. There is no I there. It's like the same but completely different.
So in other words, if you're doing proper twin practice, you're doing it without identifying with the experience of the jhana. You're just observing what's happening. And the mind is just staying on the object, radiating compassion. Did I get that correct? All right, let's move on to the next one. So this is one understanding of emptiness. Pretty standard, simple understanding. Whatever is empty of this, and so on. The next one is quite short. Let's see if I got that. Yeah, this is very short. This is the understanding of emptiness. This is the Samyutta Nikaya 35.85. Then the Venerable Ananda approached the Blessed One and said to him, "Venerable Sir, it is said, empty is the world, empty is the world. In what way, Venerable Sir, is it said, empty is the world?" "It is, Ananda, because it is empty of self and what belongs to self, that it is said, empty is the world. And what is empty of self and what belongs to self? The I, Ananda, is empty of self and of what belongs to self. Forms are empty of self and of what belongs to self. I, consciousness, is empty of self and what belongs to self. I, contact, is empty of self and of what belongs to self." Likewise, he says, "The ears are empty of self. Sounds are empty of self and of what belongs to self. Your consciousness is empty of self and of what belongs to self. Your contact is empty of self and of what belongs to self. The nose is empty of self and of what belongs to self. Odors are empty of self and of what belongs to self. Nose consciousness is empty of self and of what belongs to self. Nose contact is empty of self and of what belongs to self. The tongue is empty of self and of what belongs to self. Tastes are empty of self and of what belongs to self. Tongue consciousness is empty of self and of what belongs to self. Tongue contact is empty of self and of what belongs to self. The body is empty of self and of what belongs to self. Tangibles are empty of self and of what belongs to self. Body consciousness is empty of self and of what belongs to self. Body contact is empty of self and of what belongs to self. Mind is empty of self and of what belongs to self. Thoughts are empty of self and of what belong to self. Mind consciousness is empty of self and of what belongs to self. Mind contact is empty of self and of what belongs to self. Whatever feeling arises with eye contact, with ear contact, with nose contact, with tongue contact, with body contact, with mind contact as condition, whether pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, that too is empty of self and of what belongs to self. It is Ananda because it is empty of self and of what belongs to self that it is said, empty is the world. So this is the second understanding of emptiness. Empty of self. Empty of the conceit or idea that this is me, this is mine, or this is myself. Your six sense bases arise because of impersonal causes and conditions. Dependent upon that, there is consciousness with contact. Eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, mind consciousness. That which is aware of the experience is empty of self. When there is contact between the six sense bases internally and externally, the eye and form, the ear and sounds, the nose and odors, the tongue and the flavors, the body and tangibles, the mind and thoughts or other mental objects like the jhanic factors, like loving kindness, like compassion, like joy, like equanimity, like the quiet mind, like the signless state. All of these are empty of self, and any experience dependent upon them that arises along with the perception of what they are also empty of self and of what belongs to a self. When you see this as it actually is, there is no craving, there is no conceit, there are no views, there is no ignorance, and therefore there is no suffering. Questions?
Why didn't I learn this earlier?
Yeah.
I've been asked to speak loudly. Can anybody hear me?
Don't worry, I'll try to repeat the question.
Yeah. Before the Buddha, but while the Buddha was still a bodhisattva, he had entered all the jhanas.
Mm-hmm.
Did he also get into the cessation, full cessation? And because if you get in there, you would know the origination name. So where was he while he was still a bodhisattva and entered into all jhanas first?
Okay, so the question is, when the Buddha was still a bodhisattva, did he enter into the jhanas and the cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness, or what was his practice to get into Buddhahood?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, as the story goes in a few suttas, it was not entering into the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th jhanas, or cessation, perception, feeling, and consciousness. He went through the first 4 jhanas and then inclined his mind to the threefold knowledge. That is to say, he saw the past lives. So he went from one life to the next in previous order, and he saw how dependent origination ran through that. He understood, here I was in this life, or in that life, or this life. And he understood, oh, formations arose in this, and then they came consciousness, and then there was a new life here. And then this arose, and this arose, and this arose, and this arose, and this arose. Mm-hmm. Then his mind inclined to the arising and passing away of beings. So he saw all of the different realms, and he saw, oh, beings arise dependent upon their karma. So whatever karma is there, that is their destination, whether it's in the same life or in the next life. Then finally, when he saw that, he understood fully the process of rebirth, of dependent origination, running through the process of rebirth, karma as the mechanics of samsara, and how dependent origination runs this whole process of samsara. When he understood that, he understood the third knowledge, which is the destruction of the taints. He understood as it actually is, my mind is now empty of the taint of sensual desire. My mind is empty now of the taint of becoming. My mind is empty now of the taint of ignorance. Birth is destroyed. What had to be done has been done. There is no more coming to new being. And then he became the Buddha. But after that, he contemplated dependent origination for quite some time. In the forward order, in the reverse order, in the forward and reverse order, in the reverse order and forward order, in the reverse and forward order, and so on and so forth, until he saw all of it clearly. And then he also had the because he already understood the attainments of infinite space and infinite consciousness. He had learned it from his experience with jhanas, because he was learning how to get into nothingness from one of his previous jhana teachers. And then he was learning it from another jhana teacher who said, I don't know the way to neither perception or non-perception, but I can kind of give you the details and you can see for yourself. But he said even these jhanas are conditioned. But the jhanas he went into were not the same jhanas he experienced when he sat under the rose apple tree. There he saw, I'm in that memory of sitting under the rose apple tree as a little kid. I was feeling, very happy, very elated. My mind was relaxed. And so later, he went through each of the jhanas, went through each of the arupa jhanas, into the cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness, came out, went back through each of the jhanas in reverse order, so forward and reverse order, and back and forth again. And before he died, before he attained parinibbana, he did the same thing. He went through the first jhana, then he went through the second jhana. He came out of the first jhana, went into the second jhana. Came out of the second jhana, went into the third jhana. Came out of the third jhana, went into the fourth jhana. Came out of the fourth jhana, went into infinite space. Came out of infinite space, went into infinite consciousness. Came out of infinite consciousness and went into nothingness. Came out of nothingness and went into neither perception nor non-perception. Came out of neither perception or non-perception and went into the cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness. And then that's when the monks thought, oh no, the Buddha is gone. And then Anuruddha saw and he said, no, the Buddha is in the cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness. He still has heat, he still has vitality. And then the Buddha came out of the cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness and went back down in the reverse order. And he came back up, went into the first, came out of the first, went into the second, came out of the second, went into the third, came out of the third, went into the fourth, came out of the fourth, his mind inclined to Nibbana, and that was it. He attained Parinibbana.
Why did he do all of that before he died?
To show the monks that he could still do it. That this was the way, this was one of the ways to practice. He did a lot of things before he died, or before he went to Parinibbana, to show that this is the way to live the teachings, that he was still living the teachings. And then finally his last words were, all sankharas are impermanent. And make the right effort to let go of.
It's a good idea to go look for those past life experiences of both jhana.
If you're interested in doing something like that, come see me on the last day of the retreat, and we can talk about it. Not on this retreat, but yes, it can be useful.
When Buddha was still a bodhisattva, and for many lifetimes, right? So did he plan to become a Buddha at some point, or he just wandered aimlessly and just randomly become Buddha at one last lifetime? Was there like a plan, or was there like a random thing?
Neither. He was developing, or as the Bodhisattva, developing the paramitas. And each lifetime was an opportunity to develop it to its perfection. And when all of them were perfected and everything was in the right order, he had one last lifetime as the Bodhisattva, as Siddhartha Gautama. And then he went through that process of understanding that mortification is not the way. First he went through the process because he lived a palatial lifestyle, that overindulgence is not the way. And then he understood that self-mortification is not the way, because he went through so many different ascetic practices. And then he remembered when he sat under the rose apple tree and experienced jhana. And then sat under the Bodhi tree and experienced jhana, and then went through that whole process.
So during those times when he was building his pyramids, did he say, this is my time, I'm building love? Like, did he know that?
The causes and conditions came up as an opportunity to exercise them.
I thought that once you're enlightened, you can't go in jhana.
Once you're enlightened, you can't go in jhana? No. In fact, you can go through each jhana seamlessly. As soon as you close your eyes, you're in jhana. No need to do anything.
What's the use of it?
The understanding was that monks, even up until my last life, or final day of my life, I'm still practicing jhana. So when somebody asked the Buddha, why do you still go into jhana? Or somebody asked Narayana, why do you still go into jhana? He says, for two things. Because it's a pleasant abiding, and to inspire future generations. That's it. Yeah.
So, I said the world is empty of self, and what belongs to self, you know, our six sense bases, empty of self, and they're the basis of all our experiences. So all our experiences are empty of self. Is there? It just seems like the idea of personal experience, if you will, just kind of falls out of the picture, because the end of suffering is basically not taking anything that happens to you personally, because nothing that can possibly happen to you is personal. If something happens, if I see something beautiful, it wasn't up to me. I mean, my eyes a passive receiver. In came the form. Up comes a pleasant experience. If I don't take it personal, it doesn't matter. If I see something hideous, same thing, right? Information hits the eye. Unpleasant experience comes up. I just don't take that feeling personally. But then someone says something to me, good or bad, I don't take it personally either. So I don't take anything or anyone personally. So it almost feels isolating. I'm trying to figure out here what I'm trying to say. It just seems, if there's absolutely nothing personal, then like how am I to live? How am I to like interact with others when nothing they say technically has anything to do with me anymore, and nothing I say to them anything to do with them either?
So you're saying it would seem isolating?
It feels like isolating, and how am I supposed to relate to folks, right? Establish, friendships, partnerships, work colleagues. All of this would be completely impersonal.
Yeah. But who is it? Who would feel the isolation?
Me. The big I right here would feel very nice. Okay.
It's just a flow of impersonal processes, but you're not saying, oh, this is personal. It's an experience. As an exercise, you can understand, oh, this is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself, and eventually it just becomes a complete experience in whatever is happening. Sure, you can still use the words I, me, myself, or mine, but it's just a matter of transacting with the world. But because you're not taking anything personal, you're not offended by anything. Imagine that. How much peace is there in that?
Just I would drive my spouse nuts if I went home and he got upset, and I'm like, meh. Your feelings.
You don't even say that that's your feelings. You don't even have that. But what you do have is compassion. Compassion with the wisdom of the emptiness of self allows you to just be there, whatever is required. There's no impediment of personalizing something. So even when a decision is made, it's not made out of the fear of, oh, will it affect me in this way, or will it benefit me in this way? The decision is made as what is proper for that situation.
Like truly present.
Yeah.
No I mediating that experience.
If you have a complete experience of the present moment, of any given present moment, without any I or anything, it's just a fluidity, just a flow.
A question/comment on this. There's a way that in personal the word is used differently than what we would mean in the West in terms of not taking things personally. In personality, it's more about not coalescing yourself and the knot of perception around the specific thing that you would otherwise call a self. That lets go. But if you do something and someone says, hey, good job, you can still smile. You will still feel good. There would just not be the craving for the thing.
No creating.
Right. So you still have you can still relate to things, right? You're not a mindless robot, so to speak. You're not a zombie, right? Or you see the ice cream fall on the ground. You can even be sad for a second.
Don't bring up the ice cream.
You're still a human. You still have human emotions. You have human needs, social connections. You walk around the world and you engage as a human. It's just you do not have this basic suffering-causing mental activity of grasping and clinging and making a self out of objects. That's where the flow comes in, but the flow is still you as a human. And what many, I'm going to say awakened masters, whatever, say, it in fact feels not isolating at all, but on the contrary, it feels like you're now intimate with everything to a degree that you never thought possible. Because the main activity of the self is to say not this, not this, not this, not this, not this, and suddenly everything.
Right, that's a good way of looking at it experientially. So in other words, having the self is more isolating than not having the self. Now you can relate to people without your self-conditioning coming in the way. Really understand them as the actual.
Talk to any 2-year-old. Mine. Everything is mine.
You were describing earlier the torchlight that's going to the night sky. There's no object to land on. It's just awareness with no object. And then you said the battery runs out and then it just dies. So I assume that's when the cessation happens and that's when you see Nibbana.
Yeah.
So my question is Nibbana an object to be seen, or is it just turned off and there's nothing? Or, when you recollect the experience of Nibbana, is it that you remember anything at all? It is undescribable, or there's nothing that you remember?
So when you experience cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness, your mind comes up and is unconditioned in that specific moment. It experiences this Nibbana because it is completely unconditioned. Then there is contact with that which is unconditioned, meaning mind makes contact with it in that moment. And there is then the relief, the joy that comes up because of that. So what you can see is the experience after having made contact with Nibbana. So you actually experience Nibbana, but don't experience it. Because the experience itself is unconditioned. So for you to try to explain it within conditioned words is like that, you know, that wonderful analogy of the finger pointing to the moon. But when you see the moon, you just know, you have this joy, you have this relief. So the mind equates the Nibbana with the joy, with the relief. But that joy and that relief that comes is a result of having made contact with Nibbana. So you know that you made contact with Nibbana not because you see Nibbana, but because you have understood that you have let go, the cessation of suffering, quenching, no more fuel, nothing's going on, the unconditioned. So many words for Nibbana, but they all just point out different aspects of the experience after having touched it. But the unconditioned is such that even the word, the unconditioned, provides a concept in your mind of what that would mean. But it's non-conceptual. It's nipapancha. No mental proliferation. And there's Nibbana with remainder and Nibbana without remainder and all of these other ways of understanding it. And Nibbana is equated to the experience of full awakening. Nibbana is understood as Nibbana with remainder, which is with the 5 aggregates. And so how the mind of the Arhat experiences the world, it is quenched. It's relief. Imagine being in a state where you're just relieved all the time. Nothing to do, nothing to be, nowhere to go. That's the mind. And then Nibbana without remainder is Parinibbana.
This might be interesting. Doug Kraft likens it to this metaphor that the jhanas essentially deprive the fuel of the flame of the mind. And what happens at either perception or non-perception, there's this flickering. It's like just about to go out and light, and it comes up again. You've seen the flame. Just before it goes out, it flickers, and then it goes out. And then that happened. Whatever happens, happens. And then it lights up again. But it sees how it lights itself up.
Yeah.
And that's remarkable.
Yes. That's where the understanding of dependent origination happens. So just for anybody who wasn't able to hear that, what he was saying is, correct me if I'm wrong, if I understood incorrectly, is that at neither perception or non-perception, so jhanas, going through the jhanas is basically reducing the flame of the mind. And then when you get to neither perception or non-perception, the flame quivers. It's just about to go out. And then Nibbana is where it's fully gone. And then when it lights up again, when you light it up, it sees itself light up. So that experience after cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness, you see how this process of cognition arises, how you make this world, or how rather the mind recreates the world, from formations to consciousness to namarupa to 6 sense spaces to contact, feeling, and perception. And so then wisdom is established. And now you know for yourself, how I don't know how you would know for yourself, but you know for yourself that there is no self.
I have a vague question about conceit. I'm trying to understand what it is exactly subtle level, and how it can be let go of.
It can be let go in every single moment. When you start to see, oh, the mind is starting to see this as me, mine, or myself, you can siksar it. And just see it as, oh, it's just a feeling. This is just contact, this is just feeling, this is just perception.
But what makes it go away differently?
Meaning, what makes it go away forever? When you attain final awakening, when you attain arahantship.
Is there a way or a process?
So when you experience Nibbana, and when you see the links of dependent origination, you come through a process of understanding, and then what happens is after the mind, so when the mind makes contact with the Nibbana element, it creates, or it activates. Okay, here's one thing, before we continue. I've been asking a few people, how do formations mechanically arise? Those who know it, don't answer. How do formations, sankharas, mechanically arise?
Active potential?
How do they, what sparks them?
Intention
What's the trigger?
or intentions, actions.
Ignorance conditions it for a mind that still has work to be done. But what actually triggers its awakening, its arising?
Previous sankhara and previous moment.
How did those arise? Well, what triggered them? Okay, let's go one step further. How do you become conscious of something?
No, contact.
Contact. But how does consciousness arise? It's dependent upon mentality and materiality, but what activates the consciousness?
Contact.
Right? But then in the line of dependent origination, what activates consciousness? What comes before consciousness?
Formations.
Formations. Contact is the key. Contact gives rise to feeling, to perception, to intention, to consciousness, and to formations.
Could you say that again, please?
Contact, the process of contact, gives rise to feeling, to perception, to intention, to consciousness, and to formations.
Those are 5 feedback loops
5 feedback loops, at least,
from contact.
from contact that we know of so far.
The contact is with formations, right?
Right. So the contact
makes formations, formations
condition the contact. The contact triggers it and conditions the experience. So I'll explain it because we're going to go through formations, how they arise. We have 3 kinds of formations: bodily formations, mental formations, and verbal formations. So before you speak, your mind makes contact with whatever you've just heard. Your ears make contact with whatever you've heard. And then the formations arise, the verbal formations arise to provide you the ability to say what you want to say. When the eye makes contact with form, there's eye consciousness, but that is triggered by a mental formation that helps you to feel and perceive what is being seen. But at the same time, that formation, if laced, if tinged with craving, conceit, or ignorance, will condition how it is felt, how it is experienced. So the mind automatically inclines to taking it personal if there's conceit. Mind automatically takes it to be, I want this, when there's craving. Or mind takes it to be whatever it is in terms of, this is affecting me. Yeah.
Just so I don't have to ask this later, I hadn't heard that before. So, or I didn't know. I want to contact gives to feeling to perception.
No, contact gives rise to 5 things.
Okay.
It gives rise to feeling and perception.
In that order, yeah.
Well, yeah, so the order I gave you is not a sequential order.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just separate.
I mean, it could happen in a different way.
So, if you want to be sequential about it, contact gives rise to formations.
Okay. Okay.
Formations give rise to consciousness. Consciousness gives rise to intention. And then contact also gives rise to feeling and perception. Those 2 are separate. Feeling and perception and intention, and all the rest are separate.
Thank you.
Oh wait, sorry, Molly, you had a question. Yeah.
I just want to use an example to understand this. I hate to use strawberry ice cream.
Here we go
I have to
again.
use it.
It's the best example. It's the
So
best.
basically, the contact is where my eyes see something, and then formation is my karma with, maybe I know what strawberry ice cream is, or maybe I'm a prehistorical person, I don't know what it is. So either one of these 2 formations, the next consciousness will arise, which will say, oh, this is strawberry ice cream. Or it will say, oh, this is a blob of something red and white. And so either one of these consciousness will arise. Is that the right example?
Yeah, so let me just break that up for you. So you see the strawberry ice cream, and let's say you've seen it before. So the recognition that that's strawberry ice cream is the perception. The seeing of it is the feeling. So contact triggers the formations for you to be able to see through mental formations, which is feeling and perception. And then also triggers, oh, I want some of that strawberry ice cream. That's the intention.
I'm not understanding. How is the intention different from the craving? I want that ice cream.
The intention is, it's inclining towards that. But the I want it is a trigger of, or it's an energy, that tightness intention of I want it. Or I don't want it is also an intention.
That's before the craving.
Right. So contact, I see the ice cream, that's contact. My eyes make contact with the ice cream. That triggers the memory that this is strawberry ice cream. That memory happens through the process of formations arising and letting me know that what I am seeing is ice cream, strawberry ice cream. And it's also triggering the awareness that I am aware that I am seeing strawberry ice cream.
So consciousness is just a labeling, or is formation a labeling?
Perception is labeling. I said recognizing that this is ice cream is perception. Seeing the ice cream is feeling. Knowing that I am seeing the ice cream is consciousness, the bare awareness of something. The bare cognition, the simple cognition of something is consciousness in that process.
So seeing the pixels is consciousness.
Seeing the pixels is feeling. Consciousness allows you to be aware the pixels are there.
So how does formation affect the process of awareness of the pixels?
It's then laced, if it's laced with craving or identification, you say, oh, maybe that ice cream might feel good today.
So the formation really affects the steps after the consciousness, not the consciousness itself.
It affects before the consciousness. It's happening it's happening in real time. The trigger happens, and then there's a feedback loop, and then immediately there's the awareness of it. It happens just like that. I see the strawberry ice cream. So ice cream makes contact with ice. That's contact. There is a formation, which is the mental formation, which allows you to feel and perceive. That allows me to feel and perceive that this is ice cream. Tied to the feeling and perception, there's consciousness, the awareness that I am seeing ice cream.
So it's a bit of a reverse order. You already saw it, and then you are aware of it, not the other way around.
As soon as the eye makes contact with the ice cream, there's already a formation that arises and then allows me to see it.
Preparation.
It prepares me to see the pixelations. So when the contact is made, then I see it because the formations allow that process to happen. It's a feedback loop.
Oh, you mean formation as in the eye formation, that allows the eye consciousness
To arise, yes.
in order to actually see it.
That's the mental formations of feeling and perception that allow it to see it and perceive it. So when we see formations, consciousness, nama-rupa, or mentality materiality, six sense bases, contact, feeling. Here is contact. I see the ice cream. Contact then triggers a specific formation, that's the mental formation, which then conditions the consciousness of how I see the ice cream, which then triggers the activity of feeling and perception.
I thought the how you see part that's the consciousness.
Yes.
And the how you see it? Isn't it just seeing? Is it just pixel hitting the retina, or like light hitting the retina? How can it be a different mode of seeing, or how can it be even like different kind of consciousness other than just the perceiving of
Because the consciousness is laced with craving, or consciousness is laced with conceit. So it will look at it as, oh, this ice cream could be for me. It's just providing how you see it in terms of, instead of what you just described, is how the Arhat sees it, which is, I'm just seeing. In the seeing, there's only the seeing. There's only I consciousness arising. But when it's taken personal as a potential of how that consciousness is laced, is painted, is stained as a tainted window, or stained window, of how it sees it. That is done through the process of formations.
I see it. So
Yeah.
it's like the neurons in the eye when it hits, the retina is a neuron. When the photons hit the retina, the neuron is already tainted with formation, and they perceive the ice cream differently based on the formation.
Differently in the sense that they perceive it's ice cream, same ice cream as you see or I see. But I project that, oh, I like that ice cream. I want that ice cream. If there's craving, if there's identification in the consciousness.
You should have a poster or something that explains this.
Yeah.
With nice arrows.
Yes.
Well, yeah, but explaining it is more efficient.
Okay, I'll take two last questions and we'll move on. Go ahead.
So what you just said, if I understood you correctly, with the formation and the attachment of craving before consciousness, could that explain why you can't unsee words? That's been bothering me for a long time, is why can't I just stop the words? Because they're already, oh wow. Okay, thank you.
Once someone is aware of formations, a person doesn't know yet if it's a sound or if it's a visual input.
That's right. So when you're seeing the arising and passing away of consciousness in meditation, for example, what you're seeing is the blanks in consciousness, which is where the formations arise and give rise to consciousness. Formations arise and give rise to consciousness. You're seeing that loop continue without it going beyond Nama-rupa or the six sense bases.
This is a mechanical process.
Yeah, that's all it is.
And it can't be changed. It can't be modified. It can't be adjusted. It can't be slowed down or sped up. It's just how it is.
It is.
Whether we take it personally or not, that's
what influences that whole process.
So it's like we're 2-year-olds, right? So if a 2-year-old walked in here right now, he would see, or she would see those books and say, mine.
Yeah.
And just grab the books. I walk into this room, I see the books, I don't think mine automatically. Right. I just see they're books, but I don't think they're mine. The 2-year-old would say mine, but I'm a 2-year-old in other ways in life, because I might walk into other rooms or see other people or other things and strawberry ice cream, right? And say mine, or me, or my group, my nationality, my country, my school, whatever, my teacher. And so I have to grow up the 2-year-old self inside of me, basically.
Yes.
Train it.
Yes.
Wait, but then again, Ahant could have a book and say my book
without that clinging. Yeah. So the mine and the me I just use as transactional words. Mm-hmm. That's it. Okay, I'm going to move on now. Going once, going twice, sold. All right, so you understood the first kind of emptiness, which is the emptiness of something. And then you understand the second kind of emptiness, which is the emptiness of self in all processes. Now we're going to go into a different kind of understanding of emptiness. See if I got this right. Okay, this is a short one, but listen and attend closely because there's a lot of stuff here.
Just this one?
This is Samyutta Nikaya 41.7, Godatta Sutta. On one occasion, the Venerable Godatta was dwelling at Machi Kasanda in the wild mango grove. Then Chitta, the householder, who was an Anagami, approached the Venerable Godatta, paid homage to him, and sat down on one side. The Venerable Godatta then said to him, as he was sitting to one side, "Householder, the measureless liberation of mind, the liberation of mind by nothingness, the liberation of mind by emptiness, and the signless liberation of mind, are these things different in meaning and also different in phrasing, or are they one in meaning and different only in phrasing?" So we're talking about measureless liberation of mind by nothingness, liberation of mind by emptiness, and the signless liberation of mind. When they say liberation of mind, there's a twofold meaning here. Just as jhanas are temporary liberations, here they're talking about that in the form of a temporary liberation, and also a, I wouldn't say permanent, but unshakable, irreversible liberation. And so Chitta, now it's interesting, Chitta is talking to a monk, and the monk is asking him questions. So Chitta was known to be someone who actually even had a chance to teach some of the monastics. So the Buddha would actually send them to him to talk about the finer points of meditation, about cessation, and so on. There is a method, Venerable Sir, by which these things are different in meaning and also different in phrasing. And there is a method by which they are one in meaning and different only in phrasing. And what, Venerable Sir, is the method by which these things are different in meaning and also different in phrasing? Here, a bhikkhu dwells pervading one quarter with a mind imbued with loving kindness. Likewise, the second quarter, the third quarter, and the fourth quarter. Thus, above, below, across, and everywhere, and to all as to himself, he dwells pervading the entire world with a mind imbued with loving kindness, vast, exalted, measureless, without hostility, without ill will. Does that sound familiar?
Oh yeah.
He dwells pervading one quarter with a mind imbued with compassion, with a mind imbued with altruistic joy, with a mind imbued with equanimity. Likewise, the second quarter, the third quarter, and the fourth quarter. Thus, above, below, across, and everywhere, and to all as to himself, he dwells pervading the entire world with a mind imbued with altruistic joy, with compassion, or altruistic joy, or equanimity. Vast, exalted, measureless, without hostility, without ill will. This is called the measureless liberation of mind. When you're radiating the Brahma Viharas, there's no limit to where you're radiating. You're radiating in all directions in boundless space. It's measureless. There's no limit there. This is one way of understanding it. And what, Venerable Sir, is a liberation of mind by nothingness? Here, by completely transcending the base of the infinity of consciousness, aware that there is nothing, a bhikkhu enters and dwells in the base of nothingness. This is called the liberation of mind by nothingness. So that's the seventh jhana. That's it. The liberation of mind in this context is the seventh jhana. But remember what I said is temporary liberation, because for a while you're liberated from any of the hindrances while you're in jhana. And what, Venerable Sir, is the liberation of mind by emptiness? Here, a bhikkhu gone to the forest or to the foot of a tree or to an empty hut. The empty hut doesn't have to do anything with emptiness, right? It's just reflects thus. Empty is this of self, or of what belongs to self. This is called the liberation of mind by emptiness. So when you go into your meditation, you can actually go and see, where is the self here? Is the self in my eyes, or is the self in the experience? Is the self in the mind? And you start to see, oh, there's no self here. This is not self. This is not self. This is not self. So this liberation by emptiness is the experience of anatta. When you see the arising and passing away of consciousnesses, you see that it's impermanent, and therefore it becomes tiresome, and therefore you see that there's no controller here. It's empty of a self. That gets you to the nothingness. So in a sense, the emptiness liberation of mind, or the process of the emptiness liberation of mind, gets you to nothingness. This was something Bhante had been doing some time back. When he was first starting out, he would sit and think about this. Is this self, or is that self, or is this body self, or are these thoughts self? are these ideas self? And then he would get into that experience of anatta. And what, Venerable Sir, is the signless liberation of mind? Here, now listen carefully. Here, with non-attention to all signs, a bhikkhu enters and dwells in the signless collectedness of mind. This is called the signless liberation of mind. Non-attention to all signs. Whenever they say signs, in your mind, replace that word with object. Non-attention to any object, not even quiet mind. This is that still mind. This is that mind that's just looking. This is a temporary, conditioned, volitionally produced experience of the signless collectedness of mind. But it's a liberation, because you're liberated from all signs, all objects. This, Venerable Sir, is the method by which these things are different in meaning and also different in phrasing. And what, Venerable Sir, is the method by which these things are one in meaning and different only in phrasing. Meaning these words are synonymous. Measureless, emptiness, nothingness, and signless. Lust, Venerable Sir, is a maker of measurement. Hatred is a maker of measurement. Delusion is a maker of measurement. In other words, when there is craving, when there is greed, there is a measuring of how much can I take of this, or how much can I push away, or how much of this is mine. This measuring. Measuring also means to compare. That's the conceit also, mana. I am better than you, you are better than me, I meditate longer than you do, you meditate better than I do. Why is he having that attainment and she has that attainment? I'm not getting anywhere. This is all a measure of, or maker of measures, comparison. Lust, hatred, delusion. Greed, hatred, delusion. These are a maker of measurement, a maker of comparing things. So measuring. For a bhikkhu whose taints are destroyed, these have been abandoned, cut off at the root, made like palm stumps, obliterated so that they are no more subject to future arising. To whatever extent there are measureless liberations of mind, the unshakable liberation of mind is declared the chief among them. Now that unshakable liberation of mind is empty of lust, empty of hatred, empty of delusion. So what are they talking about? The Arahant. Empty of lust, empty of hatred, empty of delusion. And therefore that mind of the Arahant is experiencing at all times the measureless liberation of mind. Unshakable because it won't reverse, and measureless because it no longer compares based on the basis of greed, hatred, or delusion. Then he says, lust, Venerable Sir, is a something. Hatred is a something. Delusion is a something. Is a something, meaning it's tangible. It's a phenomenon. Lust is a phenomenon. Hatred is a phenomenon. Delusion is a phenomenon. It's a process. For a bhikkhu whose taints are destroyed, these have been abandoned, cut off at the root, made like palm stumps, obliterated so that they are no more subject to future arising. To whatever extent there are liberations of mind by nothingness. So nothingness meaning lust is something there, but it's no longer there. Hatred is something, but it's no longer there. Delusion is a something, but it's no longer there. The unshakable liberation of mind is declared the chief among them. Now that unshakable mind, that unshakable liberation of mind is empty of lust, empty of hatred, empty of delusion. Lust, Venerable Sir, is a maker of signs. Hatred is a maker of signs. Delusion is a maker of signs. When you have craving for something,
Craving.
we should say loving kindness to them. When you have craving, there is the I who craves, and there is an object of that craving. There's a sign, there's an object of that craving. When you have hatred, there's an I who doesn't like that. I don't like that object, whether it's a person, whether it's a situation, whether it's a thing, whether it's a feeling, that's an object of your awareness. Delusion is where it says, I am that. There's a subject that identifies with that object, with that sign. But for a bhikkhu whose taints are destroyed, these have been abandoned, cut off at the root, made like palm stumps, obliterated so that they are no more subject to future arising. To whatever extent there are signless liberations of mind, the unshakable liberation of mind is declared the chief among them. Now that unshakable liberation of mind is empty of lust, empty of hatred, empty of delusion. So that emptiness is also understood in terms of the liberation of mind by emptiness, meaning no longer any greed, hatred, or delusion in that mind, empty of those. That is the unshakable liberation of mind by emptiness. This, Venerable Sir, is the method by which these things are one in meaning and different only in phrasing. It is a gain for you, householder. It is well gained by you, householder, in that you have the eye of wisdom that ranges over the deep word of the Buddha. So we have one more sutta, but before I go on, it's a short one. Any questions? Yes?
So, I remember reading this sutta a long time ago when I came across it, when I knew less. And when I read it at the time, I remember thinking, liberation of mind to the measureless, nothing, emptiness, signless, you know, they're either through these jhanas, right, like temporarily, and it can also take you all the way to full arhatship. But I also understand that one can reach, you know, cessation and like full liberation from even the first jhana or second jhana. Like, is there a reason why they're not listed here, or why they focus only on these as a liberation of mind and not the other jhanas?
There's other suttas which talk about the 8 jhanas, temporary liberations of mind.
Only temporary?
The jhanas are temporary.
No, I mean, but can they lead you to the ultimate?
Can what lead you to the ultimate?
Like if I'm in first jhana, can that ultimately lead me to cessation and then
yes,
like nibbana?
Yes, you can experience nibbana from the first jhana onwards.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Silence is a good sign. It means they've understood everything that I just said.
Empty of questions.
Empty of questions.
So there is no papancha of the mind. There is no prolification of mind anymore. And that, it's not that it's in the mind, it's just no longer, I mean, yes, it's not in the mind in the moment, but it won't go into the mind because the sankharas have been sort of emptied of that potential.
emptied of the potential to crave, to identify, and to have ignorance.
And so the sankharas are still dispensing formations, but they're without any of those fetters.
Right. And so any consciousness that arises won't be established in craving or clinging.
And no prolification of those root causes.
No,
They
yeah,
just don't
exactly.
happen. But everything else happens normally, but without that.
Yes.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah.
It seems that if we go back to yesterday's sutta, it was about basically seeing no self or identity in any of the aspects of origination. But the Mahayana uses what's called syllogistic reasoning. In other words, smoke is coming from the house, therefore the fire is. So you see signs, and then you have to make this inference.
Okay.
The inferential cognizer. So you infer. So what they do is they use a system of negation, where they, for example, look at the body, and where is the body, and you go through the parts, collection of parts, and outside the parts, and you come to the conclusion that there is no body, you can't find it. And they do that for the self as well. And I wonder, why has this come about? It seems to me there are sort of these two systems of realizing emptiness. One is through kind of logical argument, or logical reasoning, and the other is through direct observation.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of think, sort of, which is better? And I get a bit confused, why are these two systems?
I think these two systems can be, well, I think the logical reasoning occurs as a result of observing.
Okay.
So actually observing, is there a self here? Where is myself? What is going on? Or is there self in this experience right now? And then just seeing that and realizing, oh, there is no self. Direct experience, I think, is always going to be more impactful.
This is what I think.
Yeah.
They do it because sometimes a belief can be so strong and so unconscious. The only way, or like a more immediate and skillful way to shake it off, is through logical reasoning and deconstruction. And then it leads to the direct experience, which the Mahayanas also prioritize and put above the mental gymnastics.
Yeah.
So that makes sense in the form of also reading the suttas about emptiness. So you kind of get a sense, oh, okay, they were pointing out to this, but then using that as like yesterday, everybody was listening to the 6 sets of 6, and then you were listening to it, but then later on your mind not only listened to it, but observed it as it was being read. So the sutta helps with that aspect of understanding, but then the direct observation solidifies it. Yeah.
And this, which technique is that? I'm sorry.
In the Mahayana, it's you can use logical reasoning to negate the self.
Thank you.
Okay, the final sutta for tonight is going to be about cessation and how do you get into cessation. This is Samyutta Nikaya 41.6. It's called the Kamabhu Sutta. On one occasion, the Venerable Kamabhu was dwelling at Machikasanda in the wild mango grove. Then Chitta, the householder, approached the Venerable Kamabhu, paid homage to him, sat down to one side, and said to him, "Venerable Sir, how many kinds of formations are there?" So now Chitta is just going through this process because he already knows the answers to these questions. Just having a friendly dialogue to see how this monk understands it. Kamabhu. There are, householder, three kinds of formations: the bodily formation, the verbal formation, and the mental formation. Good, Venerable Sir, the Chitta, the householder, said, that having delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable's Kamabu's statement, he asked him a further question. But, Venerable Sir, what is the bodily formation? What is the verbal formation? What is the mental formation? In-breathing and out-breathing, householder, are the bodily formation. Now, this doesn't include just in-breathing and out-breathing, but it includes perception of form, perception of the body, feeling the body, engaging with the body. Thought and examination are the verbal formation. Perception and feeling are the mental formation. Good, Venerable Sir, Chitta, the householder, said. Then he asked him a further question. But, Venerable Sir, why are in-breathing and out-breathing the bodily formation? Why are thought and examination the verbal formation? Why are perception and feeling the mental formation? Householder, in-breathing and out-breathing are bodily. These things are dependent upon the body. Anything that is dependent on the body constitutes bodily formation. That is why in-breathing and out-breathing and any other bodily processes are the bodily formation. First, one thinks and examines. Then, afterwards, one breaks into speech. So first, you have contact with whatever is being said, or you see something, your mind looks at it, thinks about it, and then there are thoughts that arise that translate into speech, or whatever it is that you want to say. That is why thought and examination are the verbal formation. Perception and feeling are mental. These things are dependent upon the mind. When you see something, when eye makes contact with form, there is feeling and perception of that. Where is that process happening? In the mind, mentality. And so that's why it's mental formations. That is why perception and feeling are the mental formation. Saying, good, Venerable Sir, he then asked him a further question. Venerable Sir, how does the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling come about? Householder, when a bhikkhu is attaining the cessation of perception and feeling, it does not occur to him, I will attain the cessation of perception. Yeah.
Except for some Q&A.
Q&A, and then you can let us know when to stop.
Yeah.
Q&A is just getting started.
Now it's gonna.
That was amazing. He figured it out without any high-tech equipment.
I'm gonna get you some more hot water.
Yeah, please.
Thank you for packing all this. Reading this, and it makes it more, the clear practice makes it more reachable.
Acharya, would you not say that in the 8th jhana, because there's no perception, there's also no flashlight?
It's flickering, the flashlight. Just like that metaphor for the candle flame. Because there's still some awareness there going on, even though you're not really perceiving what's going on.
It's awareness, but not so much attention.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
But the awareness is still dependent upon some kind of attention. Eventually, then, when you get into the
Does
signless,
it?
yes,
Awareness depends on attention.
yes, it's through attention that awareness flows. When you incline your attention somewhere, that's where the awareness flows.
Hmm. Would awareness not just be sort of in the last place that attention directed it to?
Yes.
And then it doesn't change because there's no perception and then there's no attention.
And then it
Go
switches
out.
off.
Yeah. I'm just trying to.
So in neither perception or non-perception, the reason it's called neither perception or non-perception is because you don't really. So another way to understand perception is to say recognize.
Yeah.
So you don't really recognize some of the things you're seeing. There's patterns, there's pictures, there's stuff going on, but aren't able to recognize what's
Some
going on.
subtle
Yeah.
perception
Yeah.
going. Yeah.
The sutta still calls it perception of the neither perception.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's still some attention.
There's still some
Like
attention.
flicker.
Yeah.
Okay.
That attention is collected on what we call the quiet mind. It gives stability, and eventually that melts away. In the signless state, the attention is given nowhere, just pure seeing, and then that drops too.
And you said something about quiet mind and still mind?
Yeah, because the still mind is mentioned in Nibbana by David Johnson. So he talks about quiet mind, and he goes down into still mind.
Same thing, just different terms.
No, still mind. Well, he might see it as two things. We'll have to ask him how he sees it. But the way I see it is, it's the signless state. That state I was talking about, where there's no attention to any signs.
Isn't that the 8th channel?
It's a border point between the 8th and the.
Oh, so you're saying 8th, there's some flickering, and then when it dies down, there's like the complete still mind.
Right, and then there's still awareness, and then that awareness goes away,
Yeah.
and then there's cessation.
Okay. Interesting. So how is that not like an 8.5 jhana or something?
Well, in another series of suttas, I can't find it now, I'll see if I can find it later, but there it talks about how Moggallana is training to go through each of the jhanas, and then he'll hear Buddha's words in his mind because the Buddha is going through, like where he's going through, and he says, Moggallana, you have more work to go, there's more to do, don't stay in the first jhana, and then the second jhana, and the third, and the fourth. Finally, Moggallana's in the 8th, and he says, Moggallana, go beyond that, and he stays in the signless. He says, Moggallana, this too is conditioned, leave that, and he finally attains the cessation of perception and consciousness.
That's the only mention of this in the suttas?
There are a few mentions. There's in the 121 that we talked about, and the other one that we just read, which was 41.7, and a few others. And then there's one mention of it in, I think, two mentions of it in 43 and 44, Majjhima Nikaya 43 and 44. Signless liberation of mind. Majjhima Nikaya 43 and 44.
What makes you think it's not more emphasized? It seems like a very crucial distinction.
Oh, by the way, since you mentioned, is everyone here?
I don't think it's time yet.
Grant.
Okay, let's wait. This, I think people will find really interesting, so I want to let everybody know.
Can I ask you a question too? Then you can talk about it when Grant comes back.
Yeah.
So there's always the question about, so since an anagami is not fully liberated, is the or she?
Mm-hmm.
Do they experience nibbana every time they have a neurotic experience, and if not, why? And so I guess the question is, every time there's a neurotic experience, is it accompanied by nibbana?
Mm.
And what's the difference?
Yeah.
Excuse me.
To build on that question, it seems like the neurotic experience always is associated with Nibbana for the first two attainments, but not the last. Is the impression I'm getting.
Let's see.
so glad they voted that bell down for 5 a.m. call. It's so bad. Been hard not to make personal at 5 a.m. Sleepy state.
If Grant is in Niroda, would he hear that?
No.
Let me ask my question, if that's okay, because I think it's kind of minutia.
Yeah.
Can you go from cessation down to a different jhana, or is it always in a linear order?
When you come out of cessation, mind is not in jhana.
Okay.
Just mind is chilled.
Okay. Gotcha. And then is determination, is it a form? Is that
Determination is where the mind says this mind will go into this jhana, or this mind will go into this cessation for a particular duration of time, and then come out when that duration of time is over.
just curious how that's still there, even though you experience cessation?
Even the scientists are trying to figure that one out. The idea is there's probably some kind of, see, we talk about the three formations that are there, but there's also the ayusankharas, the metabolism of the body and so on. So there must be something going on there that allows the mind to know in terms of the time, some kind of timing factor.
The body functions
No, the sankhara, like it's a processing of the body itself. Yeah, like the metabolism is one function of the body, digestion and things like that. So all of these are controlled by ayusankhara. Yeah.
I think my question is also quite not super Dhamma related, but when the doctor gives you anesthesia, you kind of lose all the, except that but you have almost all the symptoms are the same as cessation of perception, feeling, consciousness. Of course, when you come out, you're completely groggy. I'm trying to understand how does one explain that state?
It's a state of unconsciousness. So that's it. It seems like it's the same kind of state because there's no consciousness there. But it's a state where, again, nothing is going on, and then you come out and you feel groggy. There was no prior development of mind to get into that state. You need prior development of mind to go into cessation, whereas with anesthesia, you just need anesthesia. Yeah.
Yeah, this may sound very basic. What is the purpose or advantage of being in cessation if absolutely nothing is happening? Like you see with the jhanas, right? You like when you go from the rupa to arupas, you stop. You stop paying attention to like coarse perceptions and stuff like that, and I guess that's beneficial in some way, or you gain or more awareness, etc., right? As your mind powers increase, if you will. But with cessation, whether you're there for 5 minutes or 20 hours, right? Like what is the person getting out of that? Like what do they get out of cessation to begin with, and why say not just 5 minutes or why 20? Like what do you get out of more cessation when there's nothing there? Like why stay in it even longer?
Okay. This answers your question too. When you get into cessation, you experience nibbana. You come out of cessation, the mind inclines, makes contact with the nibbana element and experiences nibbana. So for the anagami, when they go into cessation and come out of it, they still experience nibbana. For the arahat, when they go into cessation and they come out, they still experience nibbana. The difference between the two is the anagami says, oh, that nibbana is mine. That experience is mine. I like that. That feels good to me. And why you would want to stay in cessation for 24 hours rather than 1 hour? Bragging rights.
Is there a practical reason though, like you get more rested or
More nibbanic?
Twice the nirvana.
Twice the nirvana. Twice the cessation, double the nirvana.
I hope it's exponential after all that work.
No, it's just a matter of mental development, mental skill, and being able to be in that. Why would you want to be in, let's say you could be in one jhana for up to 7 days. You could be in the first jhana for up to 7 days. That would be nice. But the experience of cessation is total relief. So it's just a matter of skill. It's just a matter of being able to do it. That's really it.
There's no additional relief, more time.
You still experience Nibbana. Nibbana is the same, no matter you do it for an hour or you do it for 10 hours. Just the body is completely still for those 10 hours. Completely, utterly still. If scientists were to detect any, have motion detectors and things, absolute stillness. Nothing going on.
But you'd still be breathing?
There would still be some minor respiration but it's very faint. Very faint.
Is there a correlation between the stage of awakening with the ability to go into cessation at will?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Is there a correlation between the stage of awakening, like anagami or arhat, with the ability to go into cessation at will?
So the anagami and arhat can do it.
So by kind of definition, that when someone reaches the anagami state, they'll be able to get to the cessation at will.
Right. That's right. That's the idea.
Not just haphazardly.
Not just stumble into it, but actually determine beforehand how to get into it.
Then an anagami can probably go to surgery without anesthesia.
Yeah, that's true. There you go. That's the use. There you go. You need 10 hours in surgery, just go in cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness.
So you said that learning how to go into cessation is a skill to be developed.
Yes.
Okay. So taking that is part and parcel of, in the same way that we learn the 6 R's, and we can become more and more effective at doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, over days, over weeks, over years.
Oh, yeah.
And so, is it that same sort of application of skill building used to develop cessation once one becomes an anagami that we're using to develop the 6 R's for all development in meditation, all progression? Are we applying the same? Is it the same right effort?
Yes, because you're releasing and relaxing formations to get into cessation. So you just get better at it, faster at it, quicker at it.
Wouldn't you say that rather than getting better at it, it's a reflection of how already convergent or in samadhi the mind is, which is a reflection or a directly in proportion to how much karma you've already extinguished, in a sense, right? How much tension already evacuated from the system.
Yeah, so that's why it'll be easier for the anagami, because there's no more craving and there's no more aversion there. So there's no impediment to let go of. It's much easier to glide through into cessation. Now, how do you develop that ability to go into cessation? For all of you Anagamis out there, here's how it is. Here's how it is. First, you have to know how to get into the first jhana at will. Get into the first jhana and be able to sit there for 20 minutes in that first jhana, or 10 minutes, whatever. Remember I was telling you about determining when to go to sleep? This is how it helps you. You determine at this time mind will be in cessation, at this time mind will be out of cessation. So you do a random number, 12 minutes, 7 minutes, 5 minutes and 30 seconds. If you get stopwatches, even better. Then you come in and out of the first jhana in micro units. So 5 seconds in the first jhana, 10 seconds in the second jhana, first jhana, and so on. Once you're able to develop that, move on, do the same exercise for the second jhana, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, and the sixth, and all the way up to the eighth. Then finally you go up to cessation. How do you do the same thing? I'll be in cessation for a minute or 2 minutes, 2 minutes 30 seconds, 2 minutes 50 seconds, and I'll be in cessation for 10 seconds. I'll be in cessation for 3 seconds. I'll be in cessation for 4.5 seconds. And that's how you do it. And then you start to build your ability to stay even longer periods of time. Don't go beyond 7 days. Please.
Why not?
Because the life will be extinguished from then. Then you'll be dead. The vitality, the vitality starts to diminish, and the body is not able to continue, and then it gets extinguished.
So, will you describe sounds similar to what I heard from how to develop psychic power in the Pollock tradition? They said that you do like first jhana, third, the fifth, seventh, second, fourth, sixth, eighth,
right.
alternate random
Yes.
order in very quick succession, back and forth and very quickly.
Yes.
And then you develop it. Do you know how to do that? Do you have psychic power?
So, I just want to say,
You have a question.
in the Dhammācariya, we don't pose personal questions to Acharya. Okay, so I'll just step in there.
But what you mentioned, I forgot to mention about that part. Then you're able to go from one jhana to the other. So you go from first jhana to third, third to fifth, 7 to 8, 8 to 6, 6 to 4th, second to 5th. You can just dance around from jhana to jhana to jhana like that. Once you develop that skill, then you're able to actually go and start developing cessation. The ability to go into cessation.
And to her point, then those people can develop
Psychic faculties, yeah.
powers.
So
Same thing.
the way to develop psychic faculties, very simply put, is to the process of getting into the 4th jhana. And then you do certain things to develop the divine eye, the divine ear, the ability to do certain kinds of telekinesis and things like that. So, but those are the 5 powers that you experience, which is divine eye, divine ear, divine eye, material, moving things around and manipulation of materials and things like that. And then there's seeing into one's past lives, seeing into the arising and passing away of being. So that's threefold knowledge. And then finally, the destruction of taints. So everyone can try and develop the 5 psychic developments, but the 6th is exclusive to the Arhat, which is the destruction of the taints, no longer having the taints in the mind. Yeah.
Can the psychic powers just naturally unfold without trying to develop it?
They can, because of previous development in a past life. You might have certain faculties, so you're more prone to be a feeling type, someone who's more intuitive, someone who's more empathetic, someone who has more an emotional side, is able to pick up on people's thoughts, so reading people's minds, or being able to look into other, like listen far away, clairaudience, clairvoyance, remote viewing, things like that. It might be very easy to develop those kinds of faculties for a person who has that kind of mindset to begin with. But it's not exclusive to that. You can still develop them if you needed to, or if you wanted to. So I wanted to, since we don't have that person, they can see it on the recording. So we talked about the 7 different types of people, right? Do you guys remember that? One liberated both ways, one liberated by wisdom, one who is a body witness, one who is liberated by faith, one attained to view, one who is a Dhamma follower, and one who is a faith follower. There's an 8th person, which is mentioned only one time obscurely in one sutta. And the commentaries just gloss over this person. Can't make heads and tails out of what this person is. And this is known as, in Pali, as the Animitta Vihari. The Animitta Vihari. One who dwells in the signless. So anyone who's a stream enterer all the way up to Anagami, well, even actually you can say an Arahant, who has the ability to get into the signless state of mind, can be considered an Animitta Vihari.
What does that mean?
Being able to access the signless collectedness of mind.
What does that translate to the word?
Oh, Animitta Vihari, one who resides in the signless. Yeah.
Do Arahants, when they die, do they really cease to exist? Like, is there any sort of existence beyond Nibbana? Do they really just completely disappear, or is there some sort of different dimension, different world beyond Nibbana?
So this question has been asked a lot in the suttas. What happens to a Tathagat? What happens to an Arahant after they die? And they always come with the 4 quatrains, which is, does he exist? Does he not exist? Does he exist or not exist? Does he neither exist nor not exist? And in all cases, the understanding is, the standard answer to it is form permanent or impermanent? Is feeling impermanent or impermanent? So in other words, that day I asked you the question, right? The definition of a being from the word satta is one who has identification with the 5 aggregates. When you no longer have identification with the 5 aggregates, are you still a being or a non-being?
You have the karma of a being, but when it runs out, you ain't being anymore.
So, going back to the practice of cessation, you talked about getting to first jhana at will, saying the 20 minutes, and practicing, all up and down. So I'm assuming one does that later on after a few attainments, like before you get to your first attainment. I mean, just trying to get into cessation to begin with, like most folks stumble into it, right? Because we don't start as anagamis or arahats. I'm imagining there's a skill or understanding that perhaps should be developed in another perception or non-perception, or in quiet mind, or in the signless state, that's like the practice ground to get into.
When there's no craving or aversion, it's much easier to do it. That's basically it. There's no impediment of, it's easier for the mind to be collected as an anagami rather than having the craving and aversion to deal with.
So before we're there, we just have to keep six-Ring until we get into, stumble into cessation.
Yeah. Oh.
So, if talented anagami at the end of their life, when they're sick, could choose the time of their death by going into cessation and staying there longer than 7 days.
They could.
I mean, if you're sick and you're bodies.
Or it could be like one of the arahats who just basically extinguished themselves. It could be one of the arahats who just extinguished themselves, didn't set themselves on fire. They increased the fire element, they turned into fire, and then there was nothing left of them.
Well, no, that's not practical.
Oh.
Especially if it's cold out.
Anagami is practical.
So I'll get into this and you can decide whether you want to keep it or not.
Got it.
There is something which can be called conscious cessation. This is where the mind of the Arhat experiences cessation as the third noble truth. Complete cessation of suffering. Most minds will incline to the arising of experience and then hold on to that. But the Arhat is always inclining towards the cessation of an experience. So the mind of the Arhat experiences cessation, not cessation of perception, feeling, and consciousness, but cessation as the third noble truth. So if you want to understand how the mind of an Arhat works, tune into what it feels like when you relax craving. That spaciousness of the mind, where it's like a clear blue sky. Nothing going on. Mundane Nibbana. So when we talk about Nibbana with remainder, Nibbana without remainder, Nibbana with remainder is just the Arhat with the 5 aggregates. So the natural state of the mind for an Arhat, as we said, is empty of lust, empty of hatred, empty of delusion. And the contact is signless. It doesn't land on any object. Consciousness is unestablished. There's no greed, there's no inclination, there's no delusion of saying that this is me, mine, or myself. In that sense, the mind of the Arhat has experiencing, or has been experiencing Nibbana in every moment, in that sense. Not the Nibbana that we talk about in terms of the Nibbana Dhatu, the Nibbana element which you experience in the post-cessation experience. But we're talking about just a mind that is utterly free of craving, utterly free of suffering. That's Nirodha from that example, from that experience of the third noble truth. You're embodying the third noble truth, complete cessation of suffering. And I'm going to use an analogy of how the mind of the Arhat sort of sees things. It's a very subtle analogy. So let's see if it makes sense to you guys. Here is a mirror. And here is something. Right? What is the function of a mirror? To reflect something. Take away that something, what is the mirror doing?
Nothing.
So this mirror is consciousness. It reflects a something when something arises. But if the mind ceases, there's nothing going on. It's non-reflective consciousness, non-reflective awareness. That's why we talk about the measureless liberation of mind as the Arhat, the emptiness liberation of mind, the nothingness liberation of mind, the signless liberation of mind. Not landing on any object, unestablished consciousness. This is conscious cessation.
So I'm not an Arhat. I'm sure that's clear to everyone. So in my case, I would imagine the mirror is reflecting a tainted consciousness. It's reflecting a consciousness that's been tainted in craving, if you will, and I amness and self-identity and self-view. So what I project into the world, or what's being reflected, is this nonsense, basically, that this path will help us untangle and just kind of get rid of, to have that kind of clear reflection that doesn't land on anything. In the meantime, we're just reflecting a bunch of this garbage, I guess. It just comes out of the mind, right? Like all this craving and identification and aversion and delusion, that's all that's constantly being, that I'm constantly projecting or reflecting this. My consciousness is reflecting that all the time. Is that a...
Yeah, here I'm saying the mirror doesn't matter. I mean, just for the purpose of understanding experience, not about we already know the consciousness is untainted. So we could use the word that the mirror is unpolished or polished, let's say. But all we're saying is, here's the mirror and here's the thing that's reflected. You take away that, it's non-reflective. It doesn't reflect back anything. It's just seeing everything as it is.
But we're always putting stuff up.
You had a question.
Would an arahant doesn't have an image of oneself, self-image, or the conceit of self? Does an arahant have images of other beings?
No.
Wait. There has to be. In the brain, there are specific centers creating an image of the body for the purpose of you being able to move it around or see what exists in the environment. And in the same way, there's also a mirroring in those centers of other people. So you're not grasping them as separate selves and so on, but for sure there's an image.
Yeah, I figured that you were talking about image in terms of, do you see self in the other person?
I was actually,
what he was saying.
That's a better question. That's what I...
Oh, I see. Okay.
That's what I kind of meant to ask, but I think I was asking that more when he was asking,
Yeah. Yes, you will still process the same thing. I will still see, you will still see someone as they are.
Sure.
But you won't project onto them an identity.
Yeah, that's what I meant to ask.
An identity, like what? Like you don't see me as me?
Like one wouldn't see, you would see that person in terms of how they are in that moment. But there won't be all this like projection, all of this cascading of, oh, he's like that, you know, he's always like that.
So are you saying that in the mind of an arahant, all the aggregates still work the way they did before? There's just no false lens that you're looking at?
Exactly.
Somebody
else had a question, I think, right? Over here.
Go ahead. So is the aura, see, androids?
Meaning just robots all around?
Yeah.
No. No. The arhat doesn't personalize whatever it's seeing. So whatever they're seeing, like they would know that here's Jordan. They would know that. They would know here's this person, here's this person. So there's still the feeling and perception. But now it's no longer like Jordan, and therefore Jordan is always like this, and therefore I'm going to act like this based on that.
No story behind it.
No story behind it at all. Yeah. You have a question? Oh. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so in the mirror analogy, when you die, is the mirror still functioning? So yes.
No, I'm just saying that's a question that's always asked.
Okay.
What happens there if the consciousness is unestablished? Does it continue or not continue? There's no fuel for further rebirth. It's the best we could put it.
Just two questions. Are there any footnotes to these sutras? They're so intimidating seeing the volume of them. So are there any like footnotes that you can read them faster, you know, for lay people who don't have time?
Maybe we should work on that.
Yeah, along with the other dozen things we're working on. So maybe I should, excuse me. Maybe I should say that after the retreat, and once we edit all of the tapes, that these will all be put on a private YouTube channel where everybody here will have access to every talk in the sequence that it was given. So, and there are some other things that you will have as sort of tools. So while the retreat is going to end, your engagement with the teachings will continue, and there will be a number of number of opportunities to be able to do that, and that will be given to you in an email after you get home, and it's, as we're speaking, it's being put together. So there will be a lot of follow through with this. It just doesn't end on Wednesday.
And is it possible to reach arhatship without understanding all the theory? Let's just say you say...
Yes. Yes. Yes, it is.
Digest the Nikayas.
Then you just live the Nikayas, right? With right practice, right effort, you just learn through experience. Like, oh, this is craving. This is aversion, how to let go of, what does it feel like? You're experiencing the Four Noble Truths and understanding, oh, this is what suffering is. This is how it comes to be. Oh, this is how you cease it, and this is how it is experienced. So if you can do that, then you just continue doing that. Rinse and repeat, until there's no more left.
But there's still hope.
6R until there's nothing left.
Do you have a sense of what level Jesus was?
Next question.
He was nailed on a cross and still loved everyone, so I think that leaves no room for interpretation. There's no more ahant in this.
I think it's a resurrection also, so that means he was familiar with the Bible and the book, but I thought that there was a resurrection, Jesus was reborn again, right? So that means if he was an arahant, how is it that he was reborn?
That's a rabbit hole.
I wonder, the term resurrection today is called resuscitation.
Yeah.
What's the difference between a Dhamma follower and a faith follower? They were all Sotapannas, correct?
So a Dhamma follower and faith follower are both stream entry with path. But a faith follower has the faith faculty, a faith faculty more stronger in their mind. Dhamma follower has wisdom faculty stronger in their mind. That's really the key difference.
So if I really believed in the triple gem, then that would make me a Sotapanna? Is that the idea? Like the person would know, or?
No, it's just that there are 5 faculties, right? There's the faculty of wisdom, there's the faculty of mindfulness, the faculty of energy, the faculty of collectedness, the faculty of faith, obviously, and the faculty of wisdom. So one who has more wisdom or develops through insight into this process is a Dhamma follower, and one who just upon hearing realizes, oh, this is the Dhamma, is a faith follower.
Are you going to have the opportunity to go through the transcendental dependent origination?
Day after tomorrow, last day.
Okay.
Last day. I'm saving the best for the last.
That's why I'm here.
That's why I kept it the last, so you don't run off.
So if someone, say, decides to be the Bodhisattva instead of doing the four paths enlightenment, do they just miss out on all the fun of the Dhamma?
And on all the what? I'm sorry?
Do they just miss out all the fun in Dhamma? Or do they get to have something like psychic powers or something else that's also interesting?
They just become an arhat. They become the first arhat. A Buddha is the first arhat. They go through the process of the threefold knowledge, and then, at least as we understand, Siddhartha Gautama as the Buddha went through the threefold knowledge and then experienced arhatship right there.
But before that happens, Bodhisattvas go on for like many lifetimes.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Do they have can they like develop interesting things in Dhamma, like psychic power or jhanas and things like that?
I'm sure they can. I can't say for sure, but I'm sure they can. But you know, the thing about psychic powers is, like, this is what Bhante Vimalaramsi would say, like, you have your own thoughts to deal with. Why would you want to listen to other people's thoughts?
Manindraji used to say, I can teach you how to fly, but it's much easier to buy a ticket.
That's good.
So I considered think, and I think it's an okay question. So if everything in this universe is a process, because there are no things, is Nirvana a process?
Yes. Yes. But that's the thing, you call it a process and now you bring it into the realm of the conditioned.
I just mean it flows.
Right. It's just something that happens. It is a happening, it's a process.
Is it a thing or is it a process?
It's like a wave and a particle.
Non-Dhamma Dhamma.
Yeah. Somebody else raise their hands somewhere or no? That was it. Okay, going once. All right.
I just wonder, this is just my comment, I wonder if the language we use kind of multiplies the identity part of, because everything about language is tied to like I, a subject and an object, right? So I am doing this, you are doing this. Our language inherently has that everything focused around the object or an identity, and then we think in those terms. So that kind of further makes that the feeling that I have, of identity even stronger. If we didn't have language, I wonder if it would have been much simpler. Or a different form of language.
I think there might be some languages, maybe, I might be mistaken about this, where there's like no concept of time, for example, in there, or maybe also they don't use pronouns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know of a tribe called Caddo in Peru, and they only have the pronoun we.
Ah, that's interesting. It'd be interesting to see how they experience reality. But I think as an exercise of just letting go of the need to personalize things, you could say, oh, here is a feeling, kind of create distance, instead of saying, I am feeling this. But at the end of the path, you can still use words like I, me, mine, myself as a transactional thing.
That reminds me of a question which is about non-duality in Dhamma. From a lot of this practice, there's always a mind that is aware of an object, and it's inherently dual. But then Buddha also said, to see there's only the seeing, to hear is only the heard. So that seems like a non-dual experience. So how does this all?
We're going to unpack that tomorrow, actually, with that sutta. Okay, let's share some merit. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu.